Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you're watching this from. As we all know, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet dropped earlier this morning, or late last night for all you West Coast folks. In this series, I will be discussing the competitive viability of the new Pokemon added to Scarlet and Violet. That being said, if you don't want information on the new Pokemon to be spoiled, this is your warning to click off the video and save it for later. I will preface this by saying that these competitive breakdowns are intended for VGC, not 6v6 singles, as I don't have enough experience in that field to make early meta calls like this. Now, with all that out of the way, let's talk about Baxcalibur, because this mon looks like a threat. Alright, my early impressions of this mon being a potential threat, I don't think that's very wrong. First of all, this thing is 6'11" and 463 pounds. This thing is taller than me, and anything taller than me kind of freaks me out. On an actual competitive side, the first thing I obviously look at when looking at a new Pokemon is its typing. This thing is Dragon and Ice type. Now, my singles players specifically will remember a very specific Dragon and Ice type that was kind of a menace in singles. I'm, of course, looking at Kyurem. So Dragon and Ice type is honestly really good offensive coverage. Dragon hits a lot of types for neutral. It's resisted only by Steel, and the only type immune to it is Fairy. You obviously hit your own Dragons for super effective. Ice, on the other hand, also hits a lot of targets for neutral, and you get to hit Grass and Flying and Ground and Dragon types for super effective damage. Now onto this thing's abilities. Obviously, okay, the hidden ability is Ice Body, which is like okay, but I've never seen Ice Body ever used in an official competitive, in any big major competitive Pokemon tournament, because most of the time there's just better abilities that you can use on a mon. Recovering a 16th of your HP is like useful, but you can do that with leftovers. The ability I really want to talk about is Thermal Exchange, which boosts your attack stat, I'm assuming by 1, but boosts your attack stat when the Pokemon is hit by a fire type move, and you can't be burned. Now, if it was this Pokemon can't be burned, that'd be one thing. If it boosts your attack stat when you're hit by a fire type move, but you could still be burned, that's one thing. But the fact that it boosts your attack stat when hit by a fire type move and you can't be burned is kind of insane, because the stray heat waves or flamethrowers that occasionally burn your mons cannot burn you, and now you get an attack buff. I'm thinking sit this thing in front of like a Choice Scarf Chandelure, or even just a Chandelure, switch it into a Chandelure. If it's in the game, I'm not sure. It might be. And you get an attack boost, and you can't be burned. So, great offensive typing, amazing ability. Let's check out this thing's stats, because sometimes it just so happens that a Pokemon with a great ability and great stats a great ability and great type tends to have terrible stats. It kind of keeps them on from being usable. It's not the case, spoiler alert. 87 base speed, not the fastest thing in the book. You're definitely not going to outrun everything in the game, but it's not too slow, right? Like, I've made Dragonite work, and Dragonite's only 80 base speed, I think. Now, 115 base HP, 92 defense, and 86 speed is definitely not bad for bulky stats, right? Like, the stats that you typically want on your, like, sweeper, like, offensive mons, you're usually, like, I'm usually pretty happy to see, like, 80 base HP and, like 80 to 90 base HP and, like, 70s to 80s in defenses, and this mon shatters that expectation of what I want in my offensive mons, with, again, 115 HP, 92 defense, 82 special defense. Now, your special attack isn't that important here, because I don't think you're ever using this thing as a special attacker. It will have special attacking tech moves that you can use, but that's not the main purpose here. What I really want to talk about is this 145 base attack, which, again, if you're hit by a fire type move, is increasing by +1. And you can't be burned. 145 physical attack is insane. Like, if we remember some of the heavy hitters from the Sword and Shield era, Spectrier had 145 special attack, and I have the list of physical attackers pulled up here. This is new Zacian. It's not technically, it's not the Zacian we remember. It's only 150. But Haxorus has 147, and Haxorus was an insane mon. Groudon has 150, which is only 5 more than this mon. Glastrier and Lando T both had 145, so you'd have the same offensive attacking stat as Glastrier and Lando T, but you have an easier way to boost that attacking stat. Glastrier's problem is it was slow. Landorus' problem is Landorus has no problems. Forget I said that. But Salamence only has 135 attack, Dragonite has 134, and even Tyranitar had 134. So this mon is out-hitting some of the greatest physical attackers of our history of Pokemon, and matching like the current king of VGC. because Incineroar, I refuse to acknowledge Incineroar right now. So, back to this thing's moves, right? Great stats, great ability, great typing. Really great attack stat. But let's go on to the moves now, right? Now, fitting with the trend that high-powered Dragon-type moves usually have some sort of drawback, Glaive Rush has its drawbacks. You know, during the next turn, the targets that hit that, or Pokemon attacking this Pokemon can't miss, and the moves inflict double damage, which I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's kind of a big drawback, right? Especially for singles, but this is a VGC guide. Now, 120 base power, which is the same base power as Outrage, and 100 accuracy, which is also Outrage's accuracy. But this comes, most likely, I haven't looked into it, but most likely, you will be able to pick your target with this, and you can't miss. Whereas, you know, Dragon Rush, you could pick your target and flinch, but you could miss. Outrage, you can't pick your target and you confuse yourself. Now, keep this cannot miss and inflict double damage in the back of your head, because it's going to be important later. Now, technically, you could also run Snowscape here to boost your defense stat, if you wanted to run the bulky set. Because with Snowscape, you also get to run, I saw it down here somewhere, you get to run Body Press, which is based off of your defense stat. So you have some nice combos. You could set up Snowstorm and then Body Press, double your defense, and then hit Body Press for some decent damage, right? But I don't think that will be used much. Now you have Breaking Swipe, and this was used quite a bit on like support Dragapult back in Sword and Shield, especially like prior to when we started using legendary Pokemon. A little bit once we started, but mostly prior to using legendary Pokemon. You know, you hit both Pokemon, lower their attack stats. It's pretty great for physical attackers. This mon doesn't necessarily have the speed to do it to the same effect that Dragapult did, but it could work, right? Unlike a Choice Scarf set. Now, this thing also gets Ice Shard, and priority moves are really, really good. Like, priority moves are so good that in the last VGC season we had, Quick Attackization was starting to become a thing. The ability to knock something down to its Focus Sash or to its Sturdy, or even just a really low percentage of its HP, and then finish it off with a priority move, is kind of a valuable tech, right? So moving on from Ice Shard, you have Icy Wind for speed control, right? This one also gets Bulldoze, which we'll talk about later. But in the choice of Icy Wind versus Bulldoze, I personally will most likely pick Icy Wind. Yes, it has that 5% miss chance and is weaker off of a weaker special attack. But in general, you're not really using Icy Wind to ever do damage here, you're doing it for speed control. Moving on, it does get Ice Fang, though I don't see why you would use Ice Fang over its other stab of Icicle Crash, because it is stronger. About the same accuracy. We both know 90 and 95 are both the biggest lies in Pokemon history, because they never quite feel like 90 and 95. So you're usually pretty set using Icicle Crash on this thing. Moving on, you also have Crunch if you want dark coverage. You have Dragon Claw as well if you don't want the drawbacks of Glaive Crush, but again, just bear with me on Glaive Crush for a second. Moving into the teams, you have Thunderfang. It's okay. I don't recommend it because 65 base power is not great. I'm sorry. Now, importantly, this does have Protect, and most mons these days do get Protect, but when they don't, it's kind of a hindrance, right? It does get Aerial Ace, but without Dynamax, I don't really see a need for a 60 base power Flying Stab, especially when you can use Terra Blast and have an 80 base power Flying Stab. Now, back to the Bulldoze. Again, not much stronger than Icy Wind. Icy Wind gets Stab, Bulldoze is weak. Greater attack stat than you have special attack stat. In general, though, Icy Wind will probably see more play than Bulldoze, just because you don't have to play around your own team protecting to use Icy Wind, whereas Bulldoze, you kind of have to protect your side mon for it to have any actual sort of usage. It does get Dragon Tail. I can see this being used a lot more in singles than I can doubles. I don't know the last time I've seen Dragon Tail in doubles. Moving on, it does get Rain Dance. I don't see this being used. You get Brick Break, and if screens ever become a problem, this might see usage, but from what I saw, I don't see screens ever becoming a huge problem. You get Zen Headbutt, which again, I don't necessarily see this being used a whole lot, but I could see it on like choice band sets where you're just looking for another tech move, or looking for another coverage move, right? Moving on, you do get, well, we already talked about Dragon Claw, but you get Stomping Tantrum, which is like, okay. 75 base power, but you can like protect, double protect, fail, and then have a 150 base power move. I think it works like that. But in general, you're probably going to run different ground type moves, if possible, or just no ground type moves at all, right? Now, very importantly, it gets Sword Stance, right? So you can boost your attack by getting hit with a fire type move. But this thing is Intimidate weak, right? Now, I haven't looked at all the Intimidators in this game, but let's be honest, I'm sure someone will pop up with an Intimidator at some point. Being able to Sword Stance and be at +1 when they intimidate you instead of -1, or even neutral for that matter, is kind of good. It's good. I'm sorry, it's good. There's no sugarcoating it, right? Sword Stance is a great move on physical attackers in an Intimidate heavy metagame. We already talked about Body Press with Snowscape, and this also gets Iron Head if you wanted Steel Stab, right? You could, hypothetically, if you're worried about getting hit with... Never mind, you're not gonna run Iron Head. Like, you could, for coverage, if you want to hit fairies. Yeah, you can run Iron Head to hit fairies. Now, very important is Dragon Dance, right? Dragon Dance, you raise your attack and speed. So that 87 speed I was talking about, you go from being, like, somewhat fast to now being very fast. Or not very fast, but, like, you go from being somewhat fast to quite fast. And again, with the attack boost to offset Intimidates, or just carve out an advantage if you haven't been intimidated yet. Substitute is also pretty big for singles players and doubles players, but more for singles players, especially without Dynamax around. But Substitute is good. Moving on, it does get Helping Hand if you just want to throw a surprise Helping Hand on a Pokemon. You get Earthquake as well if you don't want to run Stomping Tantrum for your ground coverage. But again, it just has that awkward side effect of having to play around with your partner Pokemon, either protecting or levitate or flying type. And then we have Outrage. If you don't like Glaive Crush, you can run Outrage. I recommend just using Glaive Rush, and then obviously Terra Blast, which everyone gets. Now, let's move on to some of the sets that this thing can possibly run. So, Baxcalibur. Oh, I need to click on the thing. New keyboard, I can't type. Don't mind me. So we have Baxcalibur. Now the first set I want to talk about is a Choice Scarf set. Now a lot of the movesets on these are going to be about the same. You'll probably run obviously like Glaive Crush, you'll run Icy Wind for speed control, you'll run Icicle Crash, and then a coverage move of your choice. So obviously Crunch, Brick Break, Body Press if you want to run Body Press, Earthquake. I would say Facade, but you're never actually getting burned because you're running this ability. Since your Choice Scarf, you probably wouldn't run like Ice Shard in this set. You could run Icicle Spear. I see this being used in singles a lot more than I do doubles. You can run Iron Head, or you can run obviously like Terra Blast. Some of the moves down here you could also use if you really wanted to. For the most part, like I personally could probably see like this being a good Choice Scarf set. Maybe Iron Head, so you don't have to like play too hard around Earthquake. The next set you could run is The next set you could run is maybe like, you could run like Life Orb on the set, you could run White Herb, you can run all sorts of items on the set, but the next set we're talking about is Dragon Dance. So you run your Protect, you would run your Glaive Rush, Glaive Rush, you'd run your Ice Stab, and you'd run Dragon Dance, and that's probably your standard Dragon Dance set. Protect could also be worked around for like Substitute, so you can make yourself immune to Intimidates entirely. So you can run Substitute or Protect in this set. And your Dragon Stab, your Ice Stab, Dragon Dance, and then in this set you would most likely run something. You obviously run like your max HP or max speed. Or I'm not going to focus too heavily on the EVs for this stuff, just because the EVs, what EV spreads you'll run in these bonds will typically depend on the metagame around them. But you kind of probably see something like this. You can invest less into this and more into HP if you wanted to, or do some defense, and again, it just depends on what you want to do. The next set I could see being a thing, or I could see being a thing. Oops, I'm not going to get used to this, by the way. You could run a Assault Vest set on this, in which case you'd run pretty much the same moves as the first one, obviously. So your Glaive Rush, your Icicle Crash. You could get away with running Ice Shard on this one as well, because you're Assault Vest and not any sort of choice, so you can get them low with Glaive Crush or Icicle Crash, and then Ice Shard to finish them off, and then again, like a coverage move of your choice. The next set that I want to talk about is, again, this is the very suboptimal set that I mentioned. I'm not really sure what item you'd run on this either. maybe Life Orb if you really wanted to. Again, like Life Orb, Leftovers, it doesn't really matter. But there's the Snowscape body press set that you could hypothetically run. I don't necessarily recommend doing this, but you could run this if you really wanted to. In this case, you'd also probably run like Ice Body, and you might even be able to do like Lum on this. You technically don't need Lum. Like, this thing has the, well, I don't know. Again, I don't recommend using this set, but if you really wanted to make it work, you could. You could run like Rest, Icy Wind, like that could be a set if you really wanted to. I don't recommend it. And then obviously, like, same as the Choice Scarf one, you run, oops. Same with the Choice Scarf, you could also run Choice Band, if you just wanted that extra power. You'd probably run about the same moves as the Choice Scarf set: Glaive Rush, Icy Wind, Icicle Crash, coverage move. But just for the most part, you're always going to be running like Glaive Rush on this mon, and you're always going to be running Icicle Crash, as well as on non-choice sets, you'd be running, like on non-choice sets, you'll probably run Ice Shard. On choice sets, you'd probably run Icy Wind, and then a coverage move of your choice. Or you could even run like dual coverage moves if you wanted to. Like, if you wanted to, you could even run dual coverage on choice sets. And so the reason I told you to keep this in the back of your head is Glaive Crush's secondary effects. Normally, that would be a problem, but our lovely friend Amoonguss is in this game. And our lovely friend Indeedee is also in this game, and it still gets Follow Me. So, yes, while not being able to dodge attacks and taking double damage from those attacks is kind of an issue, is it really an issue when you have this little cutie right here sitting away to redirect all the attacks? So yeah, that's all I have for Baxcalibur. Obviously, I'm very new to this, and it's very unstructured with how I'm doing this right now, so comment any changes that you might want to see for these guides. And make sure to like the video and subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the more motivated I'll be to do more videos. And for the question of the day, comment down below. Which starter did you pick for Scarlet and Violet? And if so inclined, tell me why. That's all from me. See you next time. Peace.